All right, camera's running. Be careful what you say.
Everybody left, we don't have to be careful.
Oh boy, oh boy. We're getting down to it. Okay, I have time to take a sip of this coffee. Since you guys are still here. Our map, remember what the green represents and what the orange represents, the two biggest kingdoms. What are we talking about though? What king, where does this fall in history? You know what I mean? What kingdom are we talking about?
This is Alexander the Great.
Yes, right.
Those are the generals.
The generals of Alexander the Great. So we're talking about the Greeks now. So we go from Assyrians to Babylonians to Medo-Persians to Greeks. Now the Greeks are getting divided up toward the latter part of their reign, but they go for a long time. And they get divided into a bunch. I think it was 8 different splits from these various generals. Most of them are very insignificant. A few of them we see up here, they're more significant, but still, you know, that blue and this purple in that region, there's a little bit, but it's pretty clear who the major players are, right? Over here, the Seleucids, they're doing pretty well for themselves. They have a massive amount of territory. However, the Ptolemies, they have the Great Nile River, and that is also the Egyptian territory, which has been known for millennia to be a powerful place. So the two biggest generals are the ones that control the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And that's what we were talking about. And it's during this time that a lot of things take place. And I struggle with it because if you look at the planet and then you look at what's going on the planet, you can see very high level things, you know, like, oh look, a nuclear missile went off. That's pretty significant. You see a mushroom cloud or something. But from a distance, you don't, you know, it may not seem very obvious to the people on the space station or whatever. But when you come down closer to Earth and you try to get a field of vision for the major things going on in America, we'll just say, if you're just focusing on things happening in America, my guess is you're going to look at big news stories, you know, things that are very significant.
Wildfires.
Yeah. Oh, I see a lot of wildfires here, you know, or something that gets most people's attention, very high level stuff. But then when you start to get down, for example, this is me in politics. I have to admit this. Like, I understand it's, you know, when it's time to vote for president, I better study up and figure out who should I vote for to be president. But then you got senators, congressmen, judges, and then you start filtering down to the local races, which are very important. But then in my mind, it's like, oh, who is this? Well, I've never heard anything about them. They're not on TV. Who do I talk to? It gets very hard to put it all together. And at every moment in time, right now and other times, people are all over the planet doing things. Things are going on. Somebody is dying at this moment. Somebody is being born and coming to life at this particular moment. You know, a lot of things are happening, and it's very easy to get lost in the details. Well, when we narrow down our scope to what specific area? Well, we're narrowing down our scope to this particular area. A lot of things are going to happen. And by the way, how do we know that there's going to be a lot of difficulty taking place to the Jews and the people that live in the land of Palestine? Well, take a look at the dividing line between the two most powerful Greek empires there are. It is right smack dab in the middle of where Palestine is. That's where Israel is. That's where these people are going to be colliding. So right in the middle of this huge political landscape, right in that battlefront, there's the small little remnant of what's left of God's people in Israel who've come back, and they're going to get hammered, basically, from both ends because they're right in the middle of the war. So we were talking about the Ptolemies last week. Easy to remember who they all are because every single one of them was named Ptolemy. So General Ptolemy of the Ptolemies was named Ptolemy pretty much every time except for we've got Cleopatra in there, but by and large, they're named Ptolemy. And so they helped grow this empire. Then we take a look at the Seleucid, I keep saying that, Seleucid Empire. And this one, majority of the time we're going to see the name Antiochus used to talk about this empire, Antiochus. And so I believe this is where we ended up last time. The Seleucid Empire is the remaining Greek empire that wins out ultimately over the Ptolemies. So they control the region of Jerusalem. Since they control it, they have power over it, and they dictate things to be done the way they want them to be done, and they just abuse them. And that's some of the things we went over last week, the ways in which they abused them. They took control of the priesthood, is one of the things they did. They installed their own person to be priest, and they did that a couple of different times, and that created a firestorm. They're hardcore conservative Jews, and who would those hardcore conservative Jews be? The Pharisees, the separatists, the separate ones, who are not going to stand for that at all. But then you have others that are more rationalistic, like let's just go along to get along, keep the peace, passive in their idea. People like Sadducees and others, they are going to want to just go along to get along, so they're going to be okay with this priesthood. But clearly this is a messed up priesthood. Why? You can see the list of things: forcing the worship of gods, forbidding sacrifices, and things that God commanded in the Old Testament law, outlawing them. That's not a very good priesthood. That's kind of the anti-priest, isn't it? That's kind of the anti-person God's looking for. So they were just trying to stomp all over what God had wanted for his people. And so the Pharisees were not about that. They were not going to let that happen. They did everything they could to put a stop to it. But that's not easy. Why? What power do the Pharisees have? They choose to commit to God and his law. That's cool. There might even be, in their heyday, there are thousands of them. That's great. What real power do these scholars, these smart people have as far as military goes? None that I'm aware of. They are totally taken over by people with real military might. And what we know about the Greeks under Alexander is they could defeat an army 10 times their size. They were just that skilled at what they did. So there's very little that can be done in a practical level for these Pharisees who wanted to stay separate. And they had the right idea there, which this is a good reminder for me that even though the Pharisees have been dragged through the mud because of their bad reputation that they have given themselves throughout Scripture, right? They've done that. They definitely have some things to brag about in their history. Some of them are the reason why maybe Judaism and the Old Testament was taken as seriously as it was. And one person has pointed this out, and I do find it interesting. All through the Old Testament, what is it that God gets upset at Israel and Judah for doing? What are they constantly doing? God calls it whoring. What is he really talking about?
Going to other gods.
Going to other gods. He likens other gods to like prostitutes or other men usually. They're the bride and they're running off with all these pagan deities, just this man, that man, the other. Constantly worshiping false gods and idols, right? They're constantly doing that. But when you get into the days of Jesus, when we look at the New Testament, we see a lot of problems with the priesthood, with the Israelites, Samaritans. We see a lot of messed up things. But one of the things we don't see is a whole bunch of idols and false gods being worshipped in that region. So one thing they seem to have learned through that long, horrid period of time is that they need to stick with one God and not keep running off after other gods, which I found that very interesting. They seem to have learned some sort of lesson, so there was some sort of hope. So now we're looking at Antiochus the Fourth, which obviously is going to get confusing because they're all named Antiochus by and large, and so a lot of them are, not all of them. But he invaded Egypt 170 BC. He replaced Jason with Menelaus, and he was a Benjamite Jew. And he was just as bad. Now, who was Jason? He was the high priest at that time. He was the high priest who was kind of forced into there. And so this guy replaced him with another bad high priest, and it just continues. Then there came word. There came gossip. This is an example, I think, of where gossip caused something troublesome. Word came that Antiochus had been killed. And what, evidently he had traveled down to Egypt and disappeared for a little while, and so somebody spread a rumor Antiochus is dead. He's been killed. So that freed up this ex-high priest Jason to come back and to assert his authority and to throw out the other high priest, that Menelaus, or however you pronounce his name. Throw him out, and he took over. Guess what? Antiochus was not dead. Antiochus was alive and well, and he came back. When he came back, he heard celebrating. Loud celebration among the Jews for, this old new high priest coming back, taking over. He heard this and is thinking, what's going on here? What's going on? Nothing good, I see. So it was at a time like that when they were celebrating, Antiochus, in this huge rage, had a pig offered on the altar. And anyone who resisted that was just killed. You talk about an insult to the priesthood, and you guys get that that's exactly what this was. This was, let's insult God's priest. Let's insult God's temple and his system of worship. How do we do that? We take an animal that God says and everyone knows is an unclean animal, one that is not fit to be eaten or sacrificed, and let's offer it to their God as a sacrifice. So he did that on purpose to really spark a rage and killing people. That's a good way to make people mad when you kill people. I haven't learned that by experience, but I have a pretty good hunch that when you kill people, others get mad about it. So he did that, and this is going to spark what is referred to later as the Maccabean Revolt. How many of you have heard of the Maccabean Revolt? Yeah, a number of you have. I thought so. The Maccabean Revolt is something pretty significant that happens in the intertestamental period time, and it is also referenced. It has significance throughout Old Testament significance as well as New Testament significance, because the Jews are aware of what happened back then, and there are going to be some feasts and things associated with it. So, Modin, which is a village in northwest of Jerusalem, 168 BC, just after this terrible event has happened and Antiochus has desecrated the temple with that pig offering, there's a priest named Mattathias. He was being forced to offer a sacrifice by a Syrian officer. And remember, Syrians, Seleucids, same thing. They're the Syrians. They're the ones that have power. He was being forced to offer this sacrifice. However, another Jew stepped in, and he was going to take his spot. And Mattathias killed that Jew, and he killed the Syrian officer, and he fled to the mountains with his family. So this guy, Matthias, and I think I have some of this up here. Yeah, I've given you guys a boatload of scribble. Sorry about that. But he was one of the family of Hasmon, or the Hasmoneans. Hasmoneans, I think we've said this before, I don't know. Hasmoneans is another name for the Maccabeans. Any of you remember the Maccabeans? The Maccabean Revolt? Judas Maccabees? Hasmoneans, Maccabeans, same thing. This guy was one of that family, and he stood up. He had 5 sons: John, Simon, Judas the Hammer. Pretty cool nickname, if I do say so myself. Judas Maccabees, Judas the Hammer Maccabees. Eleazar and Jonathan. Thousands of Jews came together in a great revolt to stand up, because these Syrians they've taken it too far. They've desecrated our temple. They've forced a pig to be altered. And so this is what sparked the Maccabean Revolution, basically. They joined them in a revolt. 168, Judas enters the temple and he cleanses it. He removes the pagan statue, any pieces of paganism, pagan worship, and he overthrew all that, and there was peace. And that peace actually lasted for about a century. During that time, the Jews were so thrilled by the results of this Maccabean revolt. The fact that this guy got so many Jews to come together and to accomplish something great. And it was big enough that politically the Syrians thought, we're just going to leave this alone, let them be, let's not have them causing any more trouble. So they had peace for they wish. They had peace for about 100 years, and that's where we get these feasts these new feasts that you see in the New Testament, the Feast of Lights, or referred to as dedication, and the one Hanukkah. This is where those feasts originate. And one of those, I believe, is because there's a legend that says that the menorah, their candle, somehow kept burning for 8 days straight. And so that's, Feast of Light. But in John chapter 10, verse 22, Jesus is mentioned as actually attending one of these feasts. So this is an example where, things like Hanukkah and others, where they weren't in the Old Testament, they weren't commanded. So why is it when you come to the New Testament, you see them there? Well, because they were added during the intertestamental period to celebrate something that was great. And there again, I think you guys know this, but why was that Maccabean revolt to Jews, why would that be such a great thing for them? Because it's a relatively small scale war. They've had bigger ones in their history. Why such a small scale war become such a big deal to them? I guess I would liken it to, if there was a small scale catastrophe where military powers and gangs and stuff had to come in and take over this little city of Merritt Island. And when they did that, they shut down all churches. And anyone that decided to walk near a church, even get a Pokestop by a church, was killed or shot in the foot, or something bad happened, right? And then we, citizens of Merritt Island, came together and scared them all out of town somehow. My guess is the rest of the world might be, that was pretty intriguing. Wow, look at that, a whole island of citizens. How about that? That's really something. But you and I together are probably going to be a little bit more excited, because that majorly affected my life, and in my case, my livelihood. I probably lost a paycheck because of that one. That's pretty bad. So you guys get it, right? This really cut into our life. This is our way of living. We're Christians and we're not allowed to meet together. That changes everything for us. And the fact that we were able to get it to go away when it had been that way for years is going to be huge to us. So when we come together, we're going to be thrilled. We're going to tell our kids about it. It's going to be quite a story. And so I think that's kind of the way it was for them. They didn't want to forget how wonderful it was. This worship that we have in the temple, these sacrifices, this is a privilege that we have gone without before. And we are so lucky to have it back. So you kids better be grateful for what your great-granddaddy Judas Maccabees did. You know what I mean? Because he cleansed this temple, and if it weren't for him, you'd be lost. You know what I mean? So they're going to want to remember that. They're going to want to celebrate that because it had a huge impact in Jewish culture. I think it's more important to talk about this in our particular study because it's probably not big history. Why would the entire world care who desecrated the Jewish temple with a pig? Not that significant maybe to the grander earth, but to us Christians and where we trace our roots, it's very significant. It affects a lot of things. When Jesus talks about the abomination that causes desolation, he's referring to something that the people would know about. The abomination that causes desolation is this very same kind of thing where you have, just like a pagan ruler came in and desecrated their temple, it was an abomination to God. It was the same type of thing. So that language to them was known. They would understand, ooh, abomination, desolation. We know what that is when people come in and wreck our worship system. So, it had some significance to them. Let's see. I think that's all I have on this. So, history continues, and so does my small font. Skirmishes continue. We were in 168 BC, now we're down to 142, so that's about 24 years later or so. These random skirmishes are going to continue, and a high priest by the name of Jonathan was in power. And this would be 165 to 142 BC. Simon succeeds him, and Simon is his brother. He is made high priest. Problem is, he's not a Levite. So you are supposed to be of the tribe of Levi in order to be a priest. He is not. So under Simon, the high priest began to be politicized. it began to be bought and sold for the first time. It got corrupted. How was he able to successfully corrupt the high priesthood? Well, he was able to somehow get the people out of paying certain taxes. Wow. So, good lesson for us. If you want to corrupt a whole group of people, just pay them off. You can get them some money, you can get away with some things, right? Because money talks. And unfortunately, that seems to be what happened. When we look back in history, the high priesthood, right around this time, right around the 140 BC, is going to turn into no longer a religious position, strictly as it was supposed to be. It's now going to turn into a political position based on power, based on significance. You remember in Jesus' day who was the high priest?
Caiaphas.
Yeah, Caiaphas was the high priest. But it also talks about his father. You remember who his father was? Caiaphas' dad was Annas. Now, Annas sometimes I believe was even referred to as the high priest, but he wasn't the high priest. Caiaphas was. Why would you call Annas the high priest? Well, because he used to be, until his son took over. So why does the Bible even mention that guy's name if he's not even the high priest? Well, the political landscape of Jesus' day would dictate that you mention anyone who's an important figure. Pilate, why is he important? Why is Pilate important and mentioned in the Bible? Think the obvious answer here. What power did he have to do? What could
Sentence Jesus.
He's the one that could kill Jesus, or he's the one that could save Jesus' life. And even though he tries to wash his hands and get out of it, he was given the authority. He could have saved Jesus' life if he wanted to. He did not. So he bears some responsibility there. He had that power, so he's worth mentioning. Annas is not even the high priest, but because he was such a prominent figure and used to be the high priest, and he's older, he is very powerful. He's like pulling the puppet strings. He could probably boss his son Caiaphas around and say, you need to make this happen. And a lot of people, I think, would catch on to this and realize, we need to please Annas if you want to get with the high priesthood and have politics on your side, have the people on your side and everything. So those are significant things that took place during Jesus' lifetime on earth that began back here. And it's sad that it was based on money, which this is a side thing or whatever, but I'm always troubled by the idea that money gets thrown around. Even in our politics, when you use money to get something, like, oh, I have this terrible legislation, but you'll get some money out of it. Oh yeah, I'll vote for that. You know what I mean? Like, I always hate it when you throw that money, because it clouds judgment in there, and it's dangerous. And I'm always scared if, our country ever gets bought, if all the votes get bought off, we're in trouble. You probably understand how I feel about that. You gotta be careful, because money can cause corruption, and it seems to do that pretty well. Simon was killed by Ptolemy, his son-in-law. So the high priesthood became the national leader. Simon, who was the high priest, was killed by Ptolemy, his son-in-law, and Ptolemy's son, John Hyrcanus, becomes a king of that region. And then we trace down the 5 descendants of the Maccabees. John Hyrcanus was the one we were just talking about. He was friendly. He was in bed with the Hellenists, the Sadducees. And what do we know about the Sadducees? Religiously, who were they?
They were Greek.
They were sad, you see.
Why were they sad, you see?
They didn't believe in eternal life.
They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in angels or demons. They only accepted the first 5 books of the Torah. They were religious liberals who were willing to accept Hellenism. And what is Hellenism again? Greek influence. Yeah, Greek influence, which will become Roman influence later. It's all kind of the same thing. Yeah. Aristobulus, John Hyrcanus' son, who put his 3 brothers in jail and took for himself the title king. So we've got this guy. Then we have Alexander Jannaeus, who extended the Jewish state to almost as big as the glory days under David and Solomon. So he's making the Jews a much bigger area, trying to get them some political power. And under his rule, we have a rift between the Pharisees and the Hasmoneans. Who are the Hasmoneans again? The Maccabees. Judas the Hammer. They're the people that saved them in the Maccabean revolt, that got rid of Antiochus for desecrating the temple. But during this guy's reign, there's a rift between the Pharisees and the Hasmoneans, or those Maccabeans. And the way I was taught, that the Pharisees were correct in this. They were probably in the right. And so Alexander poured out the temple water at his feet rather than on the altar. So now we're not even offering a sacrifice to God, we're offering it to ourselves, Mr. Leader of this, group. So what does this do? Like we said, Pharisees didn't really have political power that much. Sadducees even had more of that. They're small in number. So they turned to the Syrians. And with the Syrians' help, they fought against this guy, Alexander Jannaeus. And later on, they would separate. Now, that in and of itself is significant. Why is it significant that Pharisees would ask help from Syrians? Or Syrians, another word for that, Seleucids. I know the names are getting jumbled up. It's scrambled eggs up here, but try to separate. What do we know about the Pharisees that would make them never want to ask or be in bed with the Syrians or the Seleucids?
Everything. They're so strict.
They're very strict, right? And the Seleucids, they're the ones with Antiochus. Antiochus Epiphanes, the one from God, is what that name talks about for himself. He's the one that desecrated the temple in the first place. He's the one that they overthrew to clean up the temple for 100 years. But yet, things got so bad under this guy, Alexander Jannaeus, and the Maccabees were on the wrong side of things that they had no choice but to turn to another large army that would help. The only other large army? Antiochus's army, the Syrians. The very people they fought against. They had to turn to them for help just to overthrow this guy, Alexander. So that's very significant. These are what you would call very, very troubling times. Later, the Pharisees would give up. So this guy, Alexander, decided to let Jews come back after fighting off these Pharisees. But after he let them come back, after winning, he took 800 Pharisees and he crucified them all at once. All in one night. Why did he do that? He had dinner guests, the Sadducees, who were dinner guests that he wanted to impress. This just blew me away when I first heard it. I'm like, 800 people were crucified in one day, and why have I never heard about this? These things, they get lost sometimes, but that's pretty significant. I'm telling you, if 800 people were crucified on Merritt Island, that would be really, really, really big news for us. So that can definitely help us to understand when Pharisees and Sadducees are around in Jesus' day, and both of them sometimes have to be in these ruling, making decisions, political decisions. How well is that going to work out for them? With that kind of history? Not good at all. Not good at all. It's terrible. So, I'm going to leave that alone. You guys can see.
I liked how Paul handled it.
Yes. Tell us that. What did Paul do to handle it?
He would say, the issue here is the resurrection.
Yes. Paul was being judged by a group of Pharisees and Sadducees, and so Paul, being very, very wise, said, hey, this is only about the resurrection. I'm on trial because I believe in the resurrection. Well, the Pharisees do too, and so they're like, that's right, I believe in the resurrection. Sadducees do not. So immediately there was a fight that broke out. Now, why would they fight? Well, I think if you were sitting there eating dinner with a guy that killed on crosses 800 of my family members, you and I might have a little bad blood between us for quite some time. So it kind of makes sense to me now, the more I look at this, why the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the tension was there. And it also it just opens up the door that much more to get us to realize Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, all these different people are coming together against Jesus. I mean, you talk about the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Like, Jesus really upset people if these people are actually willing to associate with each other just to bring him down. Jesus was really messing things up for people. So, you guys got any thoughts or questions? I think we've digested enough for today. I think we have, yeah.
Wasn't Paul originally a Pharisee?
Yeah, he was. a Pharisee.
Fun.
Which makes good sense. Well, I mean, what else should he be, you know? I'm pretty sure you and I, before Christ, if we wanted to be someone, we would probably choose a Pharisee too. We wouldn't want to be wrong about it, but that was what you would choose, to separate. I mean, they're from the word separate. That's the idea of holiness. Is the same thing, the holy people. You know, I think that's what we're supposed to be, as a holy people. So, yeah, Jesus had to come to him directly to straighten him out. Let's go ahead and pray. God, thank you for helping us understand a little bit more just about the background of your word. So much there, and just reminds me that when something is said, you never know enough just by the words. You have to look at what's behind the words, the person who said it, the attitude behind it, the experiences that they've had and everything. God, with that knowledge, please help us in our study of your word, because it's not just enough to read something simple that it says, but we do want to ask, what's the context, who said it, why was it being said, all those things. We want to know the backstory too, as much as you've allowed us to. And God, with that knowledge, help us to be better witnesses, because we understand people, that we're genuine friends of them. We genuinely love them, and because of that, we want to know exactly where they're coming from so that we can share the right words with them at the right time. So give us wisdom for all these things. Thank you for everyone here and for how they're such good encouragers. In Jesus' name I pray.
Amen.
Thank you, guys. We have one more week, and then we're going to take a week break.